Hello everybody, this is Poison Dog 88 and today I'm going to be ranking all of the Polytopia texts all the way from number 1 to number 25. So a couple things to start out with. These are mainly going to be based on how useful they are when it comes to domination or might, because that's typically what everybody plays. Very seldom are there games that I've found in perfection or glory. Domination and might is where all the action is, and that's all that I play too. I don't really know any perfection tactics, so my expertise comes from domination. Secondly, I won't be ranking all the techs based on prerequisites. So, like, if, say, it's not going to be this way, but let's say meditation was the best tech. I wouldn't change it to the second best tech and put climbing as the best tech simply because you need climbing in order to go to meditation. I would just say meditation's number one. So, like, the techs won't be based on the techs that come before it. The techs before any tech won't be based on any of the techs after it. They'll mainly function as themselves. Like, how do I think they function themselves? However, there will be a little bit of that into play. Like, you can't get roads without getting riding. So obviously riding's going to be a little more important than it would as an island of its own. Anyways, without further ado, let's get to our 25th place tech, which is going to be Spiritualism. So Spiritualism is one of the least useful technologies when it comes to domination, because obviously the only things you can do with Spiritualism are grow forests for 5 stars and place forest temples for 15 stars. Grow forest is really the only part of this that's going to be useful for domination, because if you grow a forest, you can place a lumber hut or a farm on a previously dead tile. It'll just cost you 7 stars to place a lumber hut and 15 stars to place a farm, as long as, of course, you have Chivalry in order to burn the forest that you place, and you can put a farm on it. The forest temples, they're discounted temples. They're 15 stars instead of regular temples, mountain temples, and water temples, which are all 20 stars. But in domination, this is going to be the worst tech. And in 24th place, we have construction. So, aside from destroying buildings in the Wasteland Challenge, I don't think I've really ever used construction for anything. Destroying buildings is basically pointless. I can think of a few uses for it, such as destroying anything that poisons you if you capture a city from Smithery. I don't play Smithery. I've actually never played a game as Smithery, so I'm not entirely sure what those things are that poisons you. But if you want to destroy those, you can when you capture a city from Smithery, or to destroy algae, so you can put a port down, or removing a building so you can place a customs house in a spot. But that use is really negatable if you just plan carefully. Like, if you know that there's a plus 10 customs house location, obviously you're not going to put a lumber hut on there if you just plan carefully. I've done that before, and I just decided, it's not worth it to get construction just to destroy the building and put a customs house there. I can just put it in another spot. And also, I talked about this in Wasteland, but the ability to destroy ruins, like, why? Why would you need that? I haven't firsthand experienced this, but the decomposing technology that Smithery has, I'm pretty sure that gives you a refund when you destroy something, so that's far superior to construction. I guess if you want to sabotage a city, you can use construction if your opponent's about to capture it and you want to destroy, like, your altar of peace or a monument. I don't know why the altar of peace was the one I thought of. Just a monument in general, if you want to destroy one of those so that they can't get it and they can't actually ever replace it. But your goal in Polytopia is to capture cities. So if you're just sabotaging cities with things that you can't even replace, it's not going to be helpful. Anyways, windmills are the other thing you can do with construction, and they're very inferior to sawmills because typically you're going to have a lot more forests than you will have farms, unless you're playing as Zabasi, maybe Amaji. but pretty much every other tribe has higher forest spawn rates than they do have farmland spawn rates. So, construction, 24th place, only one tech is worse than that, spiritualism. So, 23rd place is going to be meditation. So, I think it was in the balance pass, or it might have been in Moonrise or diplomacy, I don't remember, but they moved the mountain defense bonus from meditation to climbing. The defense bonus was really the only reason I ever got meditation, because I was like, oh, my units can get extra defense in mountain biomes. I mean, that's not the most useful thing, but it's not useless. I guess if you're IMO and you start with meditation, you can pretty easily get the Altar of Peace, but for pretty much any other tribe, by the time you have enough stars to purchase meditation and you're not going to use them for any other tech that's actually useful, you're likely not going to be peaceful for 5 turns, so you're likely not going to be getting the Altar of Peace. Again, useful in perfection because you can get mountain temples, and I guess those can be useful in domination for the super late game if you just don't want to have any dead tiles, since mountains without metal aren't doing anything for your empire. But aside from that, it's not useful, like, at all. So our 22nd place is actually going to be right next to meditation. It's philosophy, the one you get after meditation, the tech tree. The main draw of philosophy for most people is mindbenders, and they are without a doubt the worst unit. The only thing that they're good at is messing with the AI, and they can be used against units without dash, so like your giants, your catapults, your defenders, those sorts of things. If they're hidden in the fog of war and your opponent moves a unit there, but you don't know where your opponent can see and where they can't see for the most part. They could have gotten an explorer and they can see all of your land for all you know, and you're just looking stupid putting mindbenders around places. Just, if your opponent knows you have a mindbender, they'll just not move next to it, either by virtue of stepping to the side or killing it, which is pretty easy because they have a defense stat of 1. The healing aspect of mindbenders is mediocre at best in some circumstances, but it's not fun anymore since they removed the bug that allowed you to heal units past their max health. If you weren't aware, there was a bug recently, I guess it wasn't recently, it was about a year ago now, where if you healed a unit using a mindbender, like let's say you had a warrior on 7 HP and you healed it using a mindbender, typically if you just healed that warrior normally, it would only recover 3 health because it can't go past 10, but if you used a mindbender for some reason, it would heal the full 4 no matter what, unless it was already at max health, so it would have 11 health. That was really the only time I'd ever used healing because it was just funny to walk around with 43 health giants. Polytopia is an offensive game, and healing is a defensive tactic, which makes it inherently not that good. Literacy is something else you get with philosophy, and that would be a good aspect of it because it reduces tech prices by 20%, which really adds up in the late game when you have like 19 cities and your tech prices are like 50, 70 stars. But philosophy is one of the last techs you'd buy in most games, so it really wouldn't make much of a difference with literacy. It'd be discounting maybe 3 or 4 technologies most of the time. There are some niche uses for this tech, such as the Tower of Wisdom in the late game, literacy if you rush after this tech, which is only really viable in IMO or very select Shinshi games, or Mindbenders if you're playing single player, but aside from that, not really useful. 22nd place. Our 21st place tech is Free Spirit. So this is the original temple tech. This is where you get temples. And temples are something that you can place on any field tile. And ordinarily that would be alright since these techs aren't doing much for you, but you could just not place temples. They only give you 1 population in domination, and that's all they're good for. Disbanding units, I can think of maybe 1 scenario where that would be helpful, and that's when you have a defender or something like that with 1 attack surrounded by mindbenders. And when on earth is that going to happen? When are you going to be in a situation where you have a defender that's surrounded by mindbenders? Like, that's never happened. No one even trains a single mind bender, let alone 8 mind benders, and decides the best thing to do with them is to surround a unit. I will give Free Spirit above the last 4 techs though, because there are some very niche purposes, and it is on the way to another fairly important tech, which I said wasn't going to play much of a role in my ranking, but when you're comparing Free Spirit to meditation, philosophy, spiritualism, and construction, it does give it a bit of an edge. Anyways, our 20th place technology, and this is where I'd start considering getting this tech. Like, the last 5, I wouldn't really consider getting them unless I absolutely needed to disband a unit, and mainly that would only happen in a challenge, is when I need to absolutely disband a unit, or I'm trying to get the Tower of Wisdom. But our 20th place tech and everything above this, I'd consider getting in pretty much every game. Our 20th place tech is Whaling. So pre-balance pass, this would have been a lot higher because whales used to be able to spawn inside your inner ring of a city and could skyrocket that city's production almost instantly. Like, before the balance pass, everyone, well, not everyone, but a lot of people used to play Kiku because they would hope for a spawn city with a whale or 2 inside of it, and they could just start the game with 25 stars, unlike the rest of us plebs that can only start with 5. But now it's kind of fallen from grace quite a bit. If you can pick up Whaling before you get a 3rd city, you will get a profit from just 1 whale. However, by the time you consider getting Whaling, you usually will have 3 or more cities, and in order to make use of Whaling, you need to get border growth, which also only happens typically if you have more than 3 cities, because typically border growth is achieved, or a level 4 city is usually achieved by doing some roads, because you usually don't have enough resources within a city in order to do it by itself. So you need roads, or you need some very advanced technology, or maybe a monument in order to get it that high. So Whaling isn't really going to help you in the early game, but there are some cities where you can just get like 3 or 4 whales, especially on water world maps, and that just feels so good. And that means that you can just pick up Whaling for like 20 stars, and it'll still make a profit if you have more than 2, because whales give you 10. There are some circumstances where Whaling is useful, and it's especially useful on water world and sometimes archipelago maps, but because of the extreme situational nature of Whaling, it will be in 20th place. In 19th place, wow, this has happened twice. I didn't even plan this out, but it's the tech that you get right after Whaling. It's Aquatism. I didn't even plan that out. This is one of the most late game techs ever in the game. It's a very niche technology, as are all of these on the fishing branches, like fishing, sailing, navigation, whaling, aquatism. They're all very niche because they're all based on water-based maps. They have almost no use on land-based maps, except for navigation sometimes, but I'll get to that later. Defense boosts are no joke. They're really powerful when they're used right. Like, if you have a dagger with a defense boost, a knight won't be able to kill it and thus won't be able to chain from you. But it's the least useful when it comes to water, because knights aren't typically going to be chaining on water. And by the time you have Aquatism, pretty much every other player is also going to have it, so it's just going to be neutralized. Water temples can help with ocean tiles because they're pretty much dead tiles in your empire anyways, but they're 20 stars for 1 population and a handful of points, which doesn't help you in domination. And by the time where you have stars to burn, you can just be getting water temples, it's not going to help you to have an extra population in a city. Maybe if you can get enough water temples, or if you just need 1 more population, it'll help you get a giant, but it's typically not going to be worth it for water temples. So yeah, Aquaticism, 19th place. Our 18th place tech is going to be mining. Mining is really only an interim technology. It's only useful for what comes after it in the most cases. Mines are all right, but they carry with them a problem. You see, if you harvest 2 fruit, or you harvest 2 animals, or you fish 2 fish, or you build 2 lumber huts, you get 2 population for 4 stars, Mines and also farms, which we'll get to later, it's 5 stars for 2 population. Now, that does come with an efficiency bonus because obviously you're only using 1 tile, but mines, they're not really useful by themselves. You kind of need Smithery in order to make them useful because of the, because of the forges give you so much population. Additionally, you can't place metal wherever you want, as opposed to you can place forests wherever you want if you have spiritualism, or farms wherever you want. But I mean, being able to place metal wherever you want wouldn't be a big help. But I mean, mountains can't really be used for anything else if they have metal on them. So I guess if you have a mountain with metal on it and you have stars, I guess why not get mining? So mining, it's going to be 18th place because it's not really that useful, but at the same time, why wouldn't you get it if you have the stars for it? So I said I'd talk about farming, and in 17th place, we have farming. Farms are alright, I guess. I mean, I just talked about how they were more expensive for the same amount of population as harvesting 2 fruit, animals, fish, or lumber huts. But, I mean, if you really want a lot of stars per turn, you can do the thing I said where you can grow forests, burn those forests, and place farms, but that's 15 stars for 2 population, so it doesn't really help. And farming, as I said, construction's bad, so farming doesn't really lead to anything useful after it. So 16th place, we have climbing, our first tier 1 technology. Climbing is another pretty niche technology, especially in comparison to the rest of the tier 1 technologies. In basically every game, you're not going to be required to go on top of a mountain. Usually there's some path around it, which might even be preferable because you can place roads on that path and make your units just zoom on by, as opposed to mountains where you can't place roads. But going on top of a mountain does give you an extra ring of vision, and ruins often spawn on mountains, so if you want a ruin, you're probably going to have to get climbing in order to get to some of them. So that's why it goes up this high, and also because it's a tier 1 technology, they're generally more useful because they have a lot more branches underneath them. So 15th place, speaking of tier 1 technologies, 15th place is fishing. In and of itself, fishing isn't all that useful. It's basically the same thing as organization or hunting, just for water tiles. However, it leads to some of the best technologies in the game on certain maps. As much as I love the naval game and water-based maps, most other people don't play on water-based maps because of how broken naval games are. So a lot of multiplayer games are either on dry lands or lakes. And while you can make use of fishing when it comes to lakes maps, and if you're Kiku, you always have 2 fish even if you're on a drylands map, fishing isn't going to help you that much on those maps. And yeah, so 15th place, fishing. 14th place goes to archery. Archers are some very good counters to some units that can crush you in the early mid-game, like an early giant push or catapults if you're playing against Barter specifically, or defender spam. Additionally, this gives your units a defense bonus in forests, which for a tribe that gets archery easily, usually is either going to be Barter or Hoodrick, you're going to have a lot of forests in your land, so it's going to give you a big benefit for that. However, there are a few drawbacks to archers, such as their vulnerability to units such as riders in the early game and knights in the late game, and the defense bonus isn't crazy helpful if you want to use your forests to chop for stars. So, middle of the road, 14th place, archery. In 13th place, we have navigation. So, as much as I just said about the naval strategy not being good in a lot of multiplayer games, navigation is better than fishing because of what you can do with it. I mean, obviously not all maps are created equal with navigation. Like continents, archipelago, and waterworld obviously make navigation a lot better than dry land or sometimes lakes. The only purpose that this would have on dry land is getting the Eye of God monument, which is probably the most difficult monument to get because you basically have to already have won the game in order to have every single tile explored unless you're playing on a tiny map. And if you're playing on a tiny drylands map, why on earth would you get navigation anyway? You probably would have won before you would have even thought of going down the fishing branch. But let's assume we're playing on continents. Battleships are pretty good. I mean, not pretty good, they're absolutely broken, but they're expensive. And if you're rushing a naval game, you're going to be spending a lot of stars on battleships, possibly even your entire income, and you could just focus on your economy in that case. They are able to shoot from the safety of water, which they can be countered by catapults, and basically everyone's playing barter this game, so pretty much everyone's going to have catapults. But navigation is alright. It works well on most maps, has a really tricky monument, and honestly, if you're not playing on Waterworld or Archipelago, ships and boats can probably do just fine. Because ships have an attack stat of 2, boats have 1, but really boats are only used to carrier units, and ships are just archers that you can move on water, and you don't really need a battleship on most cases. 12th place goes to Smithery. So people tend to sleep on this tech. Sure, you can get a veteran swordsman from a ruin if you want to, but that's luck-based. You're not going to be guaranteed to get a veteran swordsman if you research, or if you clear, I guess, ruins. Making your own veteran swordsman is so much better, because swordsmen are an all-around great unit. 5 stars, 3 attack, 3 defense. They make for the perfect decent unit in the mid to late game, especially with tribes such as Shinshi or Venger, who can, in the case of Venger, they get Smithery, and Shinshi can rush him pretty early because they have good mines, which is the precursor. Also, forges can be really powerful, where you can easily get level 3 or 4 with the aforementioned Shinshi or Venger. But Smithery is behind 2 pretty subpar techs, which is why it's down in 12th place instead of being higher. So 11th place is going to be our newest tech to the game, Diplomacy. I feel like Diplomacy was super overpowered when it first came out, with the cloaks that you couldn't even see the eye with your unit, so you wouldn't even know if there's a cloak nearby. And the AI loved to spam cloaks. Go watch Comeback of the Century if you don't believe me. Sometimes I'd have cities where every single tile in that city would have a dagger on it, because not only were cloaks invisible, not only did the AI love to spam them, but you could attack a city with multiple cloaks in the same turn. So they've balanced it a lot more now. But it's become a very interesting part of the game instead of just being cloak, 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 just spam them all the time. Cloaks and daggers are really fun to play around with sometimes, but the other aspects are somewhat lacking. Capital vision is not great, but it can be useful in late game or long-term multiplayer games where capitals matter a lot more than in domination. And embassies are the opposite, where they're really only useful to just screw around with the AIs. You can just kind of, I don't know if they have something built into their code, but I always feel like I can gaslight the AIs with embassies and peace treaties, where it's like, if they place an embassy in my capital or I place one in their capital, it almost seems like they want to make a peace treaty with me, and then I can just kind of gaslight them and break the peace treaty, but that's aside the point. This tech is lacking a bit in the multiplayer realm because typically multiplayer games don't last long enough to get to diplomacy. So it's not really as useful as the last 10 techs, which are techs that I would say you pretty much want to get in almost every game. So diplomacy, solid tech, 11th place. And our 10th place tech is going to be a bit of a surprising one to some of you, but I have my reasons for this. Chivalry. I'm a little harsher on Chivalry than most people are, but I'm just not a huge fan of it sometimes. Sure, knights are a great counter to catapults and daggers, which I guess they're a good counter to cloaks too, and a lot of chained weak units, so warriors without the defense bonus, archers, and mindbenders if your opponent spams mindbenders for whatever reason. but they can also be one hit killed by other knights. When they lowered the knight's health to 10, they made it susceptible to dying to other knights in one hit. So they're not as powerful as they used to be. They used to be just everyone would spam knights, and I'm kind of grateful they're not anymore. And they are located in kind of a weird part of the tech tree. They're locked behind Free Spirit, which is not a tech that really most people want to get in any game aside from getting to Chivalry. But the other ability you get from Chivalry, the ability to burn forests, is basically useless as well, unless you're going for that aforementioned strategy where you get Spiritualism, grow forests, you get Chivalry, burn the forest, and you get farming and place a farm on it for 15 stars in total. But that's just super optimizing your land, and you don't need to do that in any game unless you want to, but it gets really tedious if you really want to do that. 9th place. So these last 9 techs, if I were making a tier list, I would put these last 9 in S and A tier. And 9th place is going to be Organization. So people tend to also sleep on Organization, similar to Smithery, including myself. But only 2 tribes, those being Venger and Zabasi, have reduced fruit spawn rates, which is fewer than have reduced wild animal spawn rates, which surprised me when I learned that too. In addition, every special tribe has Organization. I know I haven't brought up the special tribes before, except for when I talked about Simanti with construction, but every special tribe has Organization, meaning it's just your very basic tech. And I'm glad they made Organization more useful by having the Diplomacy tech come from the Organization branch. So in the end, it's just solid tech to get. Harvesting fruit is 2 stars for 1 population. You can't beat that price, aside from monuments, which are free in essence, but you have to do a lot of work to get them. 8th place goes to Trade. Now, this might just be the inner water map lover coming out of me, but Trade, I feel like, is a must-have for basically every world type aside from drylands. Even on lakes or continents, you can still get +4, +6 customs houses most of the time, which gives you a nice boost of stars. Even a +2 customs house, which only has 1 port next to it, will pay itself off in 3 turns, and eventually it'll pay itself off in terms of the tech price, because you typically get trade in the late game, and if you're in the late game, you're gonna be in the late game for a while. If you're playing on Archipelago too, these things are just insanely busted. You can get some +10, +12, maybe even a +14 customs house if you're lucky. The Emperor's Tomb Monument, which is another thing that you get from trade. If you gather 100 stars, you get the Emperor's Tomb. It's a decently challenging monument to get sometimes if you're on a small map or you're playing a fast game, but it's almost inevitable that you'll get it in the late game, especially if you start placing customs houses around. And it's not in a weird spot in the tech tree. It's right after writing and roads, which I will get to, but you're typically going to have those techs in a game where you want to get trade. So solid tech gets 9th place. Yeah, trade's all around good. And next in 8th place is sailing. So why did I put sailing above both fishing and navigation? Well, again, is a very situational map, but if you're in a water map, even continents, then ports are a must-have due to how overpowered even just a ship is. The 2 population and road connection from building it is a nice bonus too, and you can use sailing to kind of sneak attack your enemies, especially if they haven't gotten an explorer, then they probably won't know that you're in the water. So again, since it's situational, I can't in good conscience give it anything more than 8th place, but it's still pretty good. And if you really are hurting for population, you can just slap down a port. Even though they're expensive, they'll still pay themselves off in 10 turns if you're upgrading to any level aside from 1, or upgrading from 1 to level 2 or from level 2 to level 3, well, they'll pay themselves off faster. Sailing should be 7th place. I miscounted. So in 6th place, we have strategy. So this might also seem like a weird choice if you're not me and you don't know what's in my head right now, but strategy has gotten a buff recently. Defenders were pretty solid units to begin with because they're good for putting in ships or battleships, and if you're on a land-based map, they can just be used to make a wall that can just kind of march forward and annoy your enemies. But the addition of the peace treaties are a decent addition when it comes to single player. They're not really useful in multiplayer, but again, I love gaslighting the AI in single player. So just being able to just say, yeah, I'll have a peace treaty with you, and then immediately breaking it once it's no longer beneficial to me, it's just so fun to do. I don't know. I might have some sort of pent-up aggression towards the Polytopia AI or something. I might need to get it checked out, but messing around with the AI and peace treaties is a lot of fun. And this is about the point of the video where I am traditionally obligated to mention how there should be some other diplomacy-based win condition. It should not just be perfection or domination. You should have a third diplomacy. Maybe if you get to a point of the game where you're allied with every single other AI tribe, you could have that be a win condition. Anyways, strategy, solid tech. It's 6th place. I mean, maybe it shouldn't be that high, but I can't really see it being under any of the rest of the techs because pretty much every game I'm going to end up getting strategy if it goes long enough. 5th place is our last tier 3 tech in mathematics. So defending? So depending on where your forests are placed and whether or not they've been chopped, sawmills can be super powerful buildings, which can lead you to a pretty early giant with all the population that they're able to bring. They're able to bring a max of 8 population, which you would need crazy luck in order to get a 8 population sawmill spot, but it's not impossible, and typically you'll have at least 3 or 4. And catapults are also really strong counters to super units and other strong units such as swordsmen, defenders, or battleships, which are commonly used in late game multiplayer. It's also not that far out of the way. It's not in a weird spot of the tech tree because when it comes to researching, most players will have forestry researched anyways. And that's because forestry is what I'm going to call part of the powerful 4 techs, the last 4 techs, which are actually in pairs, and if you look at the tech tree, they're all in the same area. So 4th place is going to be hunting. It's a tier 1 tech, so that means it's pretty good, and it's the starting tech of the debatably most overpowered tribe, Barter. But pretty much every tribe can make use of hunting in some way, except for obviously Illyrian. Out of the 12 standard tribes, though, only 3 of them have lowered wild animal spawns, those being Imperius, Amagi, and Venger, although it still seems like I can have 2 to 3 wild animals in Imperius cities. Maybe I'll have 1 in Amagi, and obviously Venger is just the worst when it comes to resources, so I don't really ever have any wild animals in Venger. But it's a very versatile technology, and it's on the way to forestry, which is another amazing technology. It would be pretty solid around organization, but a little above it in and of itself. But when you consider its place on the tech tree, it gets bumped up to 4th place. And speaking of forestry, our 3rd place tech is forestry. So there's a reason that I've mentioned it several times in this video, and that's because it's a good technology even though they nerfed it in the balance pass. Lumber huts are very inexpensive upgrades on par with fruit, on par with wild animals, and on par with fish. And when you pair forestry with another nearby tech like archery or mathematics, your forest can only get better. Alternatively, you can also chop your forests for a star, which can be useful for sabotaging a city that's about to be captured by your opponent, or you can gain a few extra stars when you want to get like a technology or building, but you're just shy of the amount of stars that you need for it. Forestry chopping forests can also be really useful if you don't have roads for some reason and you want to make your units more, or you want to make your tiles more friendly to units like riders and knights, because then they don't have the movement debuff that comes from forests. Forestry also makes for an interesting choice with Illyrion, where you can either decide to chop your forests or make lumber huts, or you can build a sanctuary nearby and gain stars from that. I think Illyrion still benefits more from sanctuaries, but that's your prerogative if you want to chop the forests or build lumber huts on them and build a sawmill. And in total forestry, third place, gets the bronze medal. Chopping forests was so amazing when it was 2 stars. It's only 1 star now, but it's still a good thing to do. And now, obviously, if you know anything about competitive Polytopia, or you've watched a lot of Polytopia or played a lot of it yourself, you probably could have guessed that these 2 technologies were going to be last. Writing gets 2nd place and roads gets 1st place. So let's go with writing first, and because it's 2nd place. The only type of game I can think of where you wouldn't like automatically think about getting writing is on a Waterworld game. And even then you might still get it because it's on the way to trade, which is a useful Waterworld technology, and roads, which may not be great in Waterworld maps, but you can at least get an easy network monument. So writers are probably the best early game unit, and they're not bad in late game either. You can just rush in and get a quick kill on a catapult or a cloak, or you can siege a city because they can escape after you attack with them. Riders are so versatile and can really mess up your opponents in the early game, and also further your expansion because they have the 2 movement points, which can be boosted with roads. If you haven't seen Gully's video on roads, I highly recommend it. I'll link it in the description. But roads are the most useful tech. They give you a mobility boost when you place it down to all units aside from cloaks, or if you're Symanti, any unit that has creep. And it gives you a fairly easy task for a monument. And most of the time, to get the Grand Bazaar, you just get it naturally by virtue of laying down roads to give your units an extra boost. There's an open city that's 3 tiles away, but you only have a rider. Just use a road. You can get there. There's a catapult threatening one of your giants, but you can't attack it easily. Just slap a road down. You can probably get to it. I can't stress enough just how amazing roads are, especially coupled with riders and knights. Knights especially can cover crazy distances. Even with just a few roads, they can get 6 tiles away because roads double your unit's movement if it's underneath them the whole time. And roads aren't that expensive to build. It's 2 stars for a tile improvement. That's not inexpensive. I mean, it can be pretty costly if you're linking up your entire empire. But if you just do it slowly, you'll have enough stars to put roads down. Like, you don't have to worry about running out of stars just because you decided you wanted mobility boosts, because you don't need roads on every single tile. Just a few roads can make or break your game. So easy 1st place in roads. So I'll run it back again from last to 1st. We have spiritualism, construction, meditation, philosophy, free spirit, whaling, aquatism, mining, farming, climbing, fishing, archery, navigation, smithery, diplomacy, chivalry, organization, trade, sailing, strategy, mathematics, hunting, forestry, riding, and roads. So you can use this tier list if you'd like, if you're a relatively new player to Polytopia and you want to figure out like what techs are good in every game, but most of these are gonna be just situationally aware. You may not want to get roads in a game because the situation just doesn't warrant roads. You may want to get construction or spiritualism because the situation warrants getting one of those. Even though I highly doubt that's going to happen, it still could happen. This is mainly just a fun video to post. I'd like to hear your thoughts on where I put some of these texts. Did I do some of them a little dirty by putting them lower? Did I overrate some of them? I probably overrated some like strategy and trade and sailing, but just let me know in the comments down below. Anyways, thank you all for watching, and I will see you all later. Goodbye.